Hey, what's up everybody? We're back with yet another attempt at a tutorial. This is take 13, I believe, so maybe we'll get it right on this one. So what you see in front of you there is just a couple of random pieces of foam that I have stacked on top of one another, and the only thing that I've done to make them fit together any better than what two random pieces of foam should is just took my thumb and pressed in on the seam to make sure that the one piece contoured to the other. Outside of that, those were not cut to any extent to try to make them match up with one another. So just to give you an idea of how easy the foam is to work with and to blend and all that. So anyways, the main part of this is going to be, believe it or not, toilet paper. Scott's single ply, so nothing but the best in this house. So, and what you'll want to do is you will just want to take and rip you up just random sized pieces. Doesn't really matter how big they are. Sometimes the bigger the better, sometimes not. Really the only thing you want to try and avoid to some extent is just straight edges on your pieces, not so much on the single piece itself. But if you go folding a piece up, you don't want to take and have you a nice clean fold like that, because you can get rid of it. It's just a little bit harder to blend that in. So really the key to it, and of course as you see I tried to do a tutorial before and it didn't quite work out for me. So this is the second time I've gotten to this point, and that's why the video started out here, because I could never make it to this point, starting out the other way. Anyways, you can use either paint or the waterproofing, this here, and in all the wet areas I use the waterproofing. So you would just take and wet your area with the waterproofing. And sometimes you can take and pick up your toilet paper with your wet brush, and sometimes you can't. But anyways, you'll just take and stick it on there, and since it was wet, it kind of stuck, and I barely have any waterproofing on my brush, which is why it's not really hardly sticking. Get a little bit more on there. I wanted to do it with the waterproofing just to give you an idea of how it's transparent. You know, it's not paint, so you're just seeing the painted area blend through. And so for one layer, that's really not that bad. And of course, the bigger your gap here, the more it's going to take to get in there. But anyway, so, and I had only done just a little dab of the waterproofing there. So that's how you'll do in your wet areas, and that's what I've done on all those rocks back there in the background. And then any areas that's not going to get wet, you can just use your paint. And we'll go ahead and finish him off with the paint there, because you do need the back to be a little bit wet there to get the toilet paper to stick. But then you just take and start sticking your pieces on there. You just want to kind of feather out away from your seam, because if you push in on the seam, then obviously it's going to show your seam again. The toilet paper is pretty thin. It is Scott single ply after all. And of course the toilet paper will just not work for me. Long thin strips, exactly what I do not want. And then, as I was saying, I can pick any of it up. This is why my videos don't go so well. Okay, this is usually where I stop and start over. I'll tell you whose fault that is. It's actually Luke Talon's fault, because after you binge watch a bunch of his videos, whose videos are perfect, you know, then subconsciously you're trying to just create this gem of a tutorial, because in your mind you're thinking that it should look like his, and in reality you've got nowhere near the video equipment that he has, I would imagine. Not that I've been to his place or anything. Anyways, so, but as you can see, Doesn't really take a whole lot to blend it together. Of course, if you're not satisfied with how that looks, you just keep going with more and more until you are. So that's pretty much all there is to that. And I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and fill in this other side, shall we? Just for kicks and giggles, right? Just to kind of give you an idea. That's a pretty big gap right there. So I'm going to take and fold up my toilet paper. Of course, you don't want to go too heavy on your folded up toilet paper because you want your paint to be able to saturate the toilet paper and get all the way through, especially if you were going to do it in the wet areas. So you want it completely dry all the way through. And then you can also fold in while you're doing it. It does help create the randomness of everything. Alright, and so that's pretty much all there is to that. I was going to also try to show you how I added the moss to the rocks. That was an afterthought. But after looking at pictures of trying to how to figure out the best way to do that hill in the back, all the pictures I seem to have come across that particular day had moss covered rocks, and I liked how it looked, so I figured I would give it a shot, and they turned out alright. But this is what I've used for the first layer, and that's pretty much the almost like the algae part of it. And then, unfortunately, I threw away the package of this. I believe it's supposed to be like shrubs or something like that. Got it at Michael's, possibly Hobby Lobby, but the odd thing about that is that looks horrible. I hate to say it anywhere else, but when I tried to use it for the moss, it actually looked pretty good. So anyways, what we will do is we will grab an open pack, and this was just green grass, if you were able to read that earlier. I'm not looking at the camera as I'm doing this because of my lack of video equipment here. But anyways, when your area is wet, you just take the grassy stuff, which I've already opened, and just sprinkle on to whatever area is wet. As far as getting your vertical surfaces, the trick I learned from Mr. Talon is just to take a piece of paper and sprinkle a little onto your piece of paper. He may have used a straw, I'm not sure. I can't quite remember. I don't have a straw, I have paper. And then you just take and blow this onto whatever area you're trying to get it to stick to. This may or may not work, and I'm going to try to keep my face off the camera. So, not sure. Highly unlikely you can see that from back there. So let's go in for a close-up, shall we? That was just a little white coating there on the front. Usually I would do that many more times to achieve that look of what we've got going on back there. We'll get a better shot of that here in a couple minutes. You ought to see my tripod that I use for my phone. You'd laugh a lot, I would imagine. Anyways, so like I said, that's kind of the algae part of it. And then to get the other part of it, you would just take some of the ground covering. Of course, you want just a little bit, tiny little pieces. And it is very hairy, so I would recommend using scissors to cut your pieces. Of course, I didn't bring my scissors over here. I'm going to step away to grab them. That would look very unprofessional in the video. Anyways, but the key to this is to just take and put it where you want. That's kind of the key to most of all of that. You want to first put it where you want it. But the actual key to this, in making it look like moss, is then to press down on it. And I have to go a little gently because this is attached to my project. And I will say the card table that I used as the stand for this project is great, don't get me wrong. But I have noticed that card tables are extremely wobbly. I can literally, like when I go to pick this up off of the table, I can see the water shake back and forth from just picking something up off the table. So something to keep in mind, but like I said, it's working out great for being the stand of my project. But anyways, and I'm just barely pushing down on that. If that was attached any better, I'd mash down on it a lot harder, and that would have taken about half the time. But since it's lightly screwed into my project, I don't want to go ripping it out. But anyways, and like I said, it looks better on the rocks that I've got it on. Let's get over here. So I apologize anytime I try to get in close. It wants to go blurry on me. Maybe it'll clear up, maybe not. Nope. So, but anyways, really, Luke would never end his scene that way. Man, I tell you what, got a long ways to go, that's for sure. So the most important part of today's video wasn't necessarily the blending of the rocks, but it was showing you where I erred on the first video in saying that a certain part should be left in place when it shouldn't be. So I wanted to point out that on each side of where the water is coming down and connecting, also behind that rock, you just can't see it, but all these spots here, I had mentioned in the first video that you don't want to be able to see this hole from the front, only from the side. But that turned out to be an issue for me because I had water like touching right here and then finding its way over. Not necessarily on that level. It was actually down this first level here. I had water coming out the side over there. And then also I had water coming down the wall inside the cave that was leaking from right here, which is why there's such a big hole right there. But in putting these rocks here, which I did before I realized that I had the leaks in these various places, but in putting these rocks here, I realized that covering up anything is not going to be a problem. So yeah, covering those shouldn't be an issue. And the nice thing about having the opening is that you can see in there and literally see where your water is at and the level of your water and make sure it's not getting out where you don't want it. But that was the most important part of today's video, and like I said, I had initially led with that because I figured you had something better to do with your life for the last 13-14 minutes or so. But unfortunately, I was running out of daylight once again, and I just figured, well, we gotta stick with it. But so one last thing before I go, and last chance of screwing it up. Wanted to make a note of the water depth in regards to how well it shows the movement. Obviously, like in real life, the more shallow the water, the more movement that you can see. So what I'll do is pick up the camera here and try to get what little bit of daylight is left. Behind that area there, I've added rocks right there. And so that's why I've got all the movement that I've got. Whereas up here, where it's deeper, if I can get up here, I'm tethered now. I killed my battery trying to make this video. So, but anyways, up here, even though the light's not really behind it, you don't see any movement. There we go. Let me get a little bit there. But and as we get down to the shallow end, you can see it really picks up. So just something to keep in mind. Now, to get that, I recommend carving out your stream areas the same depth all the way down with a little bit of a slant towards where it's going to run off. But just making your shallow areas with rocks and filling it in with stuff versus leaving the foam in that area, because if you get too shallow, then you'll have overflow, and then you're trying to go in and carve out more foam and having to re-waterproof and all that. And a lot of your depth of your water, or as far as like the height when it comes up to the edges on the banks, depends on down here at the very end where it flows over the edge. So obviously the higher that is, the deeper your water is going to be, and I kept adding rocks to achieve the movement down here, but was getting too thick on the rocks for the look that I was going for. So that's what I did, is I took and I just mashed down on that very edge there and just made it a little bit more, a little lower, so that way the rest of everything was a little bit more shallow. And so that dropped the water down to about where I wanted it. I would like a little bit more movement there, because you really only see that with the backlight, but I'd like to be able to see it just when the lighting looks like that. And I mean, you can see a little bit of movement up against where it's touching the sides of the bank and everything, but certainly nothing like what you've got going on down there. So, but and then anyways, and all this up here I'm just experimenting, so you know, I wanted to see what a flat area such as this looked like with straight dirt, and it actually doesn't look too bad, because all the other areas down here that are within the water area have been built up, which is, you know, more layers of foam. That's how all of my rocks have been done from the first video. I don't know if you remember, or obviously you can go to the video and see. But anyways, you had all those like flat top rocks in all the water areas, and of course you just take foam and add foam rocks to the top, and then blend it the same way we did the layers. And my camera typically is not that blurry. It's only when I'm trying to make this video this evening for whatever reason. Usually I can get in, yeah, close like that and show you a little bit of detail. But anyways, and so the seams and the layers of foam, those turned out really well. Of course, like I said, I just did all these with the waterproofing versus paint. And so like I said, leave the holes, and then that way you can shine your light back in there and see exactly what you've got going. It's amazing though, the drop down method in the back, have not had a problem with that at all. Didn't have to test them or anything, just cut out the holes in the bottom, set the top down in there, no leaks. But yeah, this island method, I tell you, it's kind of a pain. I think I have it now, so, which I mean I should. I have plenty of opportunity to practice on this one, so. But anyway, so that's it. Oh, one more thing. Working with water, as you can see here, that dirt is wet, and that dirt is wet because, well, why is that dirt wet? There's not any water running up there. Well, apparently, the piece of foam that I have sitting there obviously wasn't waterproofed on the bottom before I put it up there. But apparently, what's going on is I do have water running on the top of this rock, the flat rock, and then it's finding its way through there, maybe seeping up through, I'm not sure. And I stuck a tree down in that hole right there, so I assumed that maybe that's why that little bit of dirt was wet, just because I'd kind of penetrated down to that lower piece. I didn't really, I mean, I did waterproof everything there, but with the way that the moss and stuff is on the edges of everything, that's what I was talking about with the dirt. It acts like a sponge and will draw the water up from where, you know, the water's running up to your dry area. So if it's getting wet and if it's not thoroughly waterproof, it'll bring the water up. So I think that's kind of what's happening right here, because you can see a little bit of glistening right there of the water. So, but I think that's the issue. But that is one of the challenges of working with water, is that sometimes it is hard to tame, and I don't think it's doing it at this particular time. But there is another part of left hand side of that lower rock there. Sometimes the water about halfway down will jump out to the front of that rock and then run straight down. But it is the craziest thing when you see it happen, because you're thinking, why did all of a sudden it just bang a right on its way down and go out to the front of the rock? So it's, like I said, water can be kind of a nightmare sometimes. So all right, well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. My camera has taken every opportunity to go blurry on me, so we'll quit messing with your eyes and say thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.